am so excited. We have Jodi Picoult here. She is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 29 novels, including Mad Honey, which is co-authored with Jennifer Finney Boylan, Wish You Were Here, The Book of Two Ways, A Spark of Light, Great or Small Great Things, Leaving Time, My Sister's Keeper, and with daughter Samantha Van Leer, 2 young adult novels, Between the Lines and Off the Page. She lives in New Hampshire with her husband. So welcome, Jodi.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, so we'll just go ahead and get started. You've written 30 books and sold around 40 million copies. Plus, you write across genres from thrillers to romance to historical fiction. So what led to you being a writer, and what's the best part of your job?
So my mom would tell you that the first book that I wrote was called The Lobster That Was Misunderstood, and I was 5 years old, and I illustrated it, and she has a copy somewhere. Um, and I think I always liked being a storyteller, but I had a lot of great parental support when I was really little. And then I had a lot of teachers who really encouraged me to do this because I loved doing it. I was very fortunate, got to go to Princeton University and work with living, breathing writers. One in particular named Mary Morris, who is the only reason I'm here today. She really taught me everything I know. And, so I think for me, it wasn't about like, how did I get to be a writer? It's how did I get to actually make a living as a writer? Because I still kind of can't believe I could do that. There are lots of people who can call themselves writers who haven't cracked that economic model yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I am very fortunate. It's very funny because when I look back over the trajectory of my career, which is like 35 years now, a lot of people think, oh, she was an Oprah pick. She, was famous instantly. I was never an Oprah pick. I was not famous instantly. What I had was like a lot of books that just, I would write a book every year and someone would tell their friend about it. And then that friend would tell a few people. And so my fan base really grew very organically. To the point where now I consider myself like the most fortunate of writers because I really do get to write about anything I want to write about. And I'm pretty confident that my readers are going to go along on the ride with me, which a lot of writers, they don't have that luxury. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely that's one of the best things about my writing career is that I get to write about the things that fascinate me and that kind of keep me up at night, the things that I'm worried about, because that to me is going to be the most compelling story that I can tell. The other really great part of my job is actually kind of what I'm in the middle of right now, which is book tours. A lot of writers are introverts. I am not an introvert. I am a major extrovert. And I love the promotion part of book selling. I love
Mm-hmm.
being the one on the road. I love meeting readers and having these events where I get to see all these book clubs in person. And I'm almost done with the U.S. tour. It was 5 weeks of touring. We
Wow.
had anywhere between like 1,000 and 1,800 people at these events, which was like, what? I mean, I felt like I was doing a political rally or something, and I just love that people are there to hear these stories and to fall into these stories and to digest them and talk about them. Um, that to me is really, really fun. It's the last part of the equation, seeing how your books affect people. So I literally am smack in the middle. I have one more US event that I'm leaving for in a day, and then I go to the UK and Australia. And sometime around November, I will be back in my house. So
That sounds like a lot of fun. Next time you're in Ohio, let me know. Because I've met some authors and it hasn't been that kind of dynamic. They were introverts.
yeah, I think I'm rare in that sense. You're right.
So 2 of your books, My Sister's Keeper and 19 Minutes, have been banned in 35 states. And I also read that that one woman in Florida challenged all 20 of your books at a local school.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about these bans and why you think your books are being targeted?
Yeah, I actually have been very outspoken about bans, and the reality is that My Sister's Keeper is banned occasionally, but more recently, many other books of mine have been banned. 19 Minutes is one of the most banned books in America right now. Um, when I first started to think about book bans seriously and what was happening in this country, I very ironically was working on a theater project that was an adaptation of a book by another writer named Marcus Zusak called The Book Thief. And I co-wrote a musical version of that. And I was literally in a theater stage watching a prop book being burned by an actor playing a Nazi when a notification came up on my screen saying 19 Minutes had been banned again for like the 8th time in a week. And I was like, okay, wait a second. This is a little on the nose, right?
Right.
You know, prior to 2020, my books would be challenged every now and then. But after 2020, that number ramped up so fast that I literally lost track. I just couldn't keep track of them. And then in Martin County, Florida, a woman banned 92 books, a parent in the district, in one fell swoop. 20 of those 92 were my novels.
Wow.
She said that they were porn, although she admits that she has not read any of these books of mine. She also banned books that did not have a single kiss in them. And she also banned a book that I wrote about the Holocaust, which again, very meta, right? And that was really the beginning. Since then, my books have been banned over 40 times in the first half of this year alone. And what we've seen in Florida is it's just gone off the rails in particular. After that Martin County district, then we saw Collier County banning 300 books. We saw Escambia County burning 1,500 books, 8 of which were mine. We saw Orange County banning 700 books. And this is just in Florida. I mean, this is happening all across the United States. And, what I will tell you is that, like many of the other authors challenged right now, I don't write porn. Sorry. But there are some really badly worded laws that are being passed in certain states that are allowing parents to make decisions, not just for their own children, but apparently for other people's children as well, which is where the real problem lies in book banning. We know that bans have increased in America more than 1,100% since 2020. We know that bans aren't just at school libraries, they are also happening in public libraries. Last year, the book bans at public libraries were up 92%, with about 1,700 individual titles that were challenged. That's kind of where this is going right now. We also know that what was being banned initially were books that were written by or about BIPOC people or LGBTQIA people. And then that started changing and again encompassing the broader group of books that they feel have sexual or mature content in them, which is where most of my books fall, for them anyway. And so, what's happening is we are seeing this incredible rash of book banning across America that is fragmented and is hard to stop. And we know that the people who want book bans are in the minority. What they will tell you is that they are trying to protect the children. What we also know is that when a child who feels marginalized reads a book where they see themselves reflected in the pages, we know that that is incredibly helpful to that child. We know that a kid who has grown up in a community where maybe there's a lot of homogeneity and where people are all thinking the same kinds of thoughts, who get to meet new ideas and new people in the safe space of a book, that also is incredibly valuable. And so these pearl clutching parents who are saying they're just trying to protect the children, what they're really doing is taking away tools from kids that can help them make sense of an increasingly complex world. So I am one of many authors that has been fighting very hard against this really rampant trend of what's going on in this country with book banning. As I've said many, many times, there's absolutely nothing wrong with deciding what your child is ready to read. I was a mom. I would do the same thing. I would read hard books with my kids and then we'd have a conversation about it. But there's a really big problem with one parent deciding what your child should read. That is not acceptable.
I agree.
So that's basically where we're at right now. And what we're seeing in a lot of these states, and many of the people in the chat I'm seeing are shocked by the kinds of books that are being banned and are living in where this is happening. Educators are operating in a culture of fear. Media specialists are operating in a culture of fear because in certain states, you can lose a teaching license, you can be fined, you can be slapped with a felony if you have an objectionable book on your shelf. That's not the way. That's not the way I was raised to treat teachers and media specialists who actually have degrees to figure out what is appropriate by age for a kid, you
Right.
know. And so I think that there's a lot of questions, I hope, from the audience asking, what can we actually do about this? How do we make this kind of change? And I'm sure we'll get to all that. But anyway.
Well, so I know you're using your platform to push back.
Yeah.
What impact are you seeing with your pushback?
Well, it's kind of funny. This is I always call this the second job I never wanted. Um, because I mean I knew that book bans were happening, particularly for LGBTQIA and BIPOC authors.
Mm-hmm.
That's not who I happen to be. But I do have a really large platform. I'm quite fortunate that way. And as you heard, I am an extrovert, so I'm loud. And when they started coming after my books, I wasn't going to sit down and just let it happen. I'm very fortunate in that because I'm at a point in my career where I have a big platform and I have a big profile, I was able to speak out on national news programs with Anderson
Mm-hmm.
Cooper. I've been able to go to amazing conferences that are being run by PEN America down in Florida to
Mm-hmm.
support educators who are really on the front lines of this. So I think that I've always believed if you're lucky enough to have people listening to you, you should consider very hard what you can say to them
Mm-hmm.
and what you can say to make a difference. And I know that people have heard the things that I've been saying. Um, I know that I'm not fighting, I'm not screaming into a vacuum. I think the challenge right now with book bans is that the majority of Americans do not support them. The
Mm-hmm.
minority of people who are fighting for book bans are very, very loud. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is that we all have to be a little bit louder. But the numbers, we've got the numbers. When 70% of America says we don't want book bans, if we all whisper together, it's going to sound like a roar. And that's what
Yes.
we have to remember. We're all in this together. We just
Mm-hmm.
have to actually do the work and do the action to make sure that these very loud voices do not get to hog the microphone.
Well, you made some really good points, as we've been talking, about the fact that you have not just written these books, but you've been able to make a living off of them. So when you're talking about book bans for authors that maybe are just starting out and are, BIPOC,
Yeah.
LGBTQIA plus, and it was probably, a labor of love in some aspects for them to write these books and then for them to be banned.
Right.
What kind of impact are you seeing with those authors?
So, one of the first things I hear all the time is, "Oh, your book's a banned. That's gonna drive up sales." You know, and we're all like, "That's not true, first of all, but it's particularly not true for young adult authors, for middle grade authors, for authors whose livelihood is not like me writing for adults. They are the ones who are having make and break careers based on what school libraries and what public libraries buy their books for their constituents. And
Mhm.
so I think that when the public dismisses book bans as a good thing for the author, you're being very narrow minded. It's not a good thing. There is no author that wants any of their books banned. What we all want is the freedom to read, freedom of expression. And I think that we have to kind of reframe that conversation because it is incredibly detrimental to a lot of authors who don't have whose primary income is based on reading the reading skills of elementary and middle school and even high school kids.
Mhm.
So I think that is something that I've always kind of felt like when you are in a minority group and you start saying, hey, this isn't right, this isn't fair, a lot of times nobody hears you, right?
Right.
But then the minute someone in the majority says, hey, you know what? She's got a point. Well, all of a sudden everybody listens. And
Mhm.
so I'm really lucky that I'm not a YA author. I'm not BIPOC. I'm not LGBTQ, but I can still speak up for those
Mhm.
authors who are, because
Mhm.
maybe that means other people will listen.
Mhm. So we here at Red, Wine, and Blue, we do work with the group Authors Against Banned Books in love, you know, the authors are coming together to fight these bans. And I know you said that you work with PEN America. How else do you see authors and publishers and bookstores like kind of supporting each other and working together?
So, I think for the most part, we do see most bookstores are very, anti-ban books. I think that for a long time, publishers just didn't know what to do. And I'm very proud of the fact that my publisher, which is Penguin Random House, was the first one to actually start a lawsuit against a state that was banning books. It is a lawsuit that I'm a part of. It was happening in Iowa. They have recently started another lawsuit in Florida that I am also a part of with other authors. And that's great because they and other plaintiffs in the suit, we all have the publishing company has our backs basically.
That's cool.
Right. It's really cool. And it was important that they took that legal step because they can. But again, like I said, there are a lot of ways that individuals, I think, can make a difference. So first of all, I think it's really important to get involved. I know you guys are very politically involved as an organization. Get in at the grassroots level because that is how you stop these terrible laws from being passed in your state. The grassroots movement to keep laws that will be seen as parental consent laws off the books. That's really important. It's also important to notice that there have been states that have passed laws opposing book bans, like Illinois, like Washington and Maryland. We can only hope that more of those are going to follow. But even to a smaller micro level, run for your public library trustee board, run for your school board. What we saw after 2020 was a rash of Moms for Liberty taking seats on public school boards, sometimes when they didn't have kids in the school. And they are the ones that are pushing through this agenda of banned books, this kind of Christo fast fascist agenda to get rid of books that they find objectionable. Again, emphasis on they find. I think it's also important to say that as an individual, you can personally move the needle. So first off, what can you do? Well, you all have social media. You're all on the internet because you're here, right? Use your social media to fight back when you hear, well, it's a school ban. That's not really a ban. People can go buy your book on Amazon, right? That's not a ban. Well, guess what? It is a ban. Even if it's temporary, it's a ban. Even if it's in a school library, it's a ban. And it's really important to not let them reframe that conversation. One thing that I hate is that when I go on social media and I start engaging with these people, I am consistently called a groomer. Let me tell you, that does not feel good. But why do you want to put porn in front of our kids? And I mean, the more I push and the more I say, but have you read 19 Minutes? Do you know what it's about? None of them have ever said yes. And I should tell you, if anyone in this chat here today has read 19 Minutes, it is a book about bullying and about school violence. That is not why it is banned. It is banned because on page 313, there is a date rape scene and the word erection. So these schools, like Florida, for example, where they have actually had devastating school shootings, they are willing to tell me that it's okay for a 5-year-old to have a school shooter drill in kindergarten, but it's not okay for 19 Minutes to be in their high school library. So again, do not let them co-opt the conversation. Turn it back on them and say a ban is a ban is a ban. I also think that it's important to say that the reason school libraries exist is because there are kids who cannot afford a book if they want to go buy it, or cannot even physically get to a public library. I live in a really rural area, and if there wasn't some kind of public transit system, there's no way a middle school kid without a car would be able to get to a library. So that's why school libraries were created. And that's why a ban there is a ban. As I said before, please run for school board if you have the bandwidth or the inclination to do so. It's really important to be able to do that. We have seen that people who are doing that are edging out the Moms for Liberty candidates, which is exactly what we need. We need your voice against book banning on school, school boards and school committees. What else can you do? You can, all those little free libraries that are all around your neighborhood, go buy some banned books and stuff them with banned books so that people have to read these banned books and maybe learn something from them. If you have kids, encourage them to speak out on social media, encourage them to start a banned book club in their
Mhm.
school if you can.
Mhm.
If you run a book club, maybe this is the year you decide to only read banned books. You know, bring this to the forefront. The more we talk about it, the more this tiny minority of people who want book bans can't control the conversation. And that
Mhm.
ultimately brings us right back to what I said earlier, which is we don't have to scream. We just all have to quietly agree together to speak out because we will drown them out.
Yes. That's so accurate. And it's so, you know, you have reinforced a lot of the teachings that Julie and I have done over the last really year or more. We've had a lot of folks on to teach folks how to do a public records request.
Mhm.
How, you know, encouraging women to run for their school boards, to organize their communities
Mhm.
so that they can get those candidates, you know, into those positions. And it's interesting because one of the things that you very first said was that your book spread by word of mouth.
Mhm.
And we here at Red Wine and Blue are big on relational organizing.
Yeah.
And so basically your readers, you know, were doing this very
Also,
same
right?
thing.
Yeah.
And it's so it because it's not hard. You know, it's not hard to do to talk to someone about, oh,
Sure.
well, this is what I'm getting ready to go do, or this is what I'm getting ready to read. This is, you know,
Yeah.
all of those things. And so I love that because I heard that and I thought, oh, I got to bring that up.
There's also, I have a good friend who is a bookseller, an independent bookseller in Maryland.
Hmm.
Her store is called Park Books, and she runs from her store a banned book subscription box service, which is so cool because she has authors like me who've been banned curate 3 books, an adult one, a YA book, and a kids book that have all been banned. And we talk about why those books shouldn't be banned. We write a letter in there. There's all kinds of resources that she sends out with the books so that all you have to do is literally sign your name to a form letter and send it off to the superintendent of that school district, you know, so that
Nice.
you can oppose it. It's great grassroots activism. And if you can afford to do that, I highly recommend it.
That is really, really nice.
Park,
Well, so
Park
yeah,
in Maryland.
Park Books, you said Park Books in Maryland. Okay. So through your writing, you are able to help open readers' eyes about things that they may have absolutely no personal experience on.
Yeah.
Things like microaggressions, homophobia, or the trans experience. So how do you approach these important topics in a way that shines a light without directly telling readers what to think?
So when I write about something extremely controversial, I always feel like it is my job to give you both sides of the situation, even if it's not something that I personally agree with. Because ultimately, I shouldn't be telling you what to think. You should have the freedom to decide what you want. All I want to do is have my books force you to question, why do you believe what you believe?
Mhm.
So, for example, when I was writing Small Great Things, which is about racism in America, one of the voices in that book is a white supremacist. And yes, I did meet with former white supremacists to hear what that life is like, what they would believe, and writing that point of view was disgusting. I literally had to take a shower every time I wrote in Turk's voice because I just felt so gross. And yet, it was really important that that be in that book,
Mhm.
because that is the overt racist, right? That's what everyone can point to as a racist. And yet there's other kinds of racism in that book, well-meaning, nice white people who say, I'm not a racist, but that's not the same as being an anti-racist.
Right.
And you know, that's kind of the message of that book. And that was a big learning curve for me too, you know, but I needed to get that across. And the way to do it was to give the reader the image and the character of the racist they expected
Mhm.
without shining up that mirror necessarily to their own faces quite yet, because that's also part of the book. When I was writing Sing You Home, which is about gay rights,
Mhm.
my son, my oldest son, is gay, came out to me while I was writing that book. And I had to go and do research with Focus on the Family, which is an extremely conservative religious group based in Colorado. And I met
Mhm.
with their public information officer, and I was asking all these questions. And one of the things I asked was, do you worry that your rhetoric might inflame hate crimes against LGBTQ people?
Mhm.
And she just looked at me and she goes, well, thank goodness that doesn't happen. And I looked at her and I said, do you know who Matthew Shepard is? Referencing the poor young gay man who was basically left to die in barbed wire in
Mhm.
Wyoming. And she just looked at me and went, who's that? And I had to excuse myself and I had to go to the bathroom and like splash all this water on my face because all of a sudden I wasn't being a journalist and I wasn't being a novelist. I was being a mom and I was like ready to kill this woman. And
Yeah.
I basically had to get to a point where I could go back into that interview and do my job. And
Mhm.
again, my job is always to present you with the facts. You get
Mhm.
to make the decision, and I'm just going to hope that you make the progressive one.
Oh, I did see a question in the chat. Someone asked, what's the difference between a banned book and a challenged book?
So a banned book is, well, I mean, to be honest, there's not much difference. And I'll tell you why. Because although these laws exist that say if something is objectionable, like for example, in the state of Iowa, if there's any book with an objectionable sexual material in it, it can be pulled off a shelf. They do
Mm.
not define what is mature or sexual material, period. And so everything is subject to everyone's personal beliefs. So what happens is basically um, just a free for all. Books get pulled off shelves, and there's no process very often for review.
Mhm.
That is exactly what the book banners want. They know that it's going to be a tremendous amount of work because it's the media specialist, the principal, the school board. All these people have other jobs, and they're going
Mhm.
to have to wade through, in the case of Florida, 1,500 books that are pulled off a shelf. In the case of one school in Florida, a mom told me that her son's elementary school library was empty for over a year because that's how long it took for them to go through all of the books that had been challenged. So the first step is a challenge, but the minute it's pulled off a book, it is under review and theoretically it is banned. As long as the book is not available to the students to read, it is a ban.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Well, we talk a lot about the shadow banning too, where it's on the shelf, but they're not allowed to check it out.
Right. And
So,
I think that's one of the most fascinating things for me about the whole banning issue, that the people who want to ban books immediately leaped into, oh no, 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 this material must be destroyed. It must come off the shelves. Instead of, I don't know if my kid's ready for this yet. So maybe let's have some kind of permission slip opt-in system.
hey,
Right? Wouldn't that be just a great happy medium?
I don't know how it got to. I don't want my kid to read it, and I don't want your kid to read it either. So I don't know how that
Well,
happened.
for me, the most telling fact is that, the Supreme Court's definition of pornography is that it has no literary or artistic value. 19
Mhm.
Minutes has won numerous awards, particularly teen reading awards and state reading awards. It was curriculum in over 30 states a year after it was published in 2007. Now, that book
Wow.
has not changed one word since it was published. So, what has changed? And that tells me it's the country, it's the people who are involving themselves in the decision making of school boards, it's
Mhm.
the lawmakers in these states. That's what's different. And that's what we need to push back on.
So I've got a couple of questions here from the chat, and then want to ask you about your new book too before you have to go. So, obviously you're an amazing writer. What advice do you have for us mere mortals when it comes to telling our stories to influence others about voting?
Oh, that's such a good question. The thing is, I don't know that you can influence people uh in terms of voting. What I think you can do is help clear their eyes a little bit. And I find that the most compelling way to do that is to tell a story. In this case, in the case of voting rights, I would say a true story would probably be the most important one. I know, for example, that for me, abortion rights are a very important issue when it comes to voting personally.
Mhm.
And so when I hear these stories about women who really have been bleeding in hospitals and have doctors unwilling to care for them, it breaks my heart when I
Mhm.
hear about a mom who finds out that she's got a stillborn or the baby's incompatible with life, and she's past the 24-week mark. um, the thought of having to suffer through a second loss, by waiting for that delivery seems cruel and unusual to me. So I would say telling your story in a way that helps someone understand why that issue is so personally important to you.
Mm.
That's how you relate to another person, like on a very personal level. I have, like I told you, my eldest son is gay. He is happily married. He gave me my first grandchild because of an amazing woman who was a surrogate and because of IVF. And if we start changing IVF laws and if abortion becomes nationally banned, that starts to happen. Well, all of a sudden their whole family is breaking apart.
Mhm.
If we go back on, gay marriage in this country, if we roll that back, what
Mhm.
happens to them?
Mhm.
Those are the stories that I tell people, you know.
Gotcha. So, do you have a favorite book, or is there an author that you fangirl over?
Yeah, so the first author I really fangirled over was Alice Hoffman. Love her. And she was the first author I read when I left college and I got to be like, a reader again instead of just reading what I was told to. And I remember I was like a little baby author and I got invited to some conference and she was going to be at it. And I was like, yes, yes, I will crawl there. I will do anything. And, they always tell you don't meet your heroes. But in this case, it was amazing because Alice was just as lovely as I wanted her to be, just so real.
Good.
She felt like my big sister. And yes, I did leave there with her cell phone number. And yes, we're friends now.
I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh, that's so great.
I'm also seeing a
So,
lot of questions in the chat about where to find out how books are banned. Very
mhm,
often, there are groups like the Freedom to Read in Texas,
mhm,
um, PEN America in various states. They compile huge lists of what has been banned state by state. The Florida Department of Education actually has a whole list of all the books that are banned. Amazingly, half of them are misspelled, but I'm not even going to go into that.
no surprise there. A lot of cutting and pasting we've seen across the nation.
Right.
Do these attempts actually to legislate these book bans, do they force authors to self-censor to get published? That's
Can you repeat that? To what?
so all of these, laws and things that are happening, do you think that authors are self-censoring themselves in order to get published?
Yes, I know that for a fact. um, because there are, especially smaller presses, they're terrified.
Mhm.
There are laws. There's a law passed in Tennessee that if a publisher tries to circumvent the government and get books to a school, they will sue them. They will be held. They will be responsible criminally. So
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
yeah, like it's insane the level that it's gotten to. So yes, I do think that authors are thinking twice, especially new authors, about what they're going to write, which is not good for anybody, to be honest.
Mhm.
It's not good
Mhm.
for the authors because it's censorship, it's self-censorship. It's also not good for the kids who don't get to see those stories on a shelf. Like if we don't get to see stories about queer kids
Mhm.
on bookshelves, then maybe a kid who's questioning their sexual orientation is going to feel like there's something terribly wrong with them.
Mhm.
And we all know where that leads to in terms of mental health. That's not great.
No.
Again, that is why books are so vitally important. I bet every single person on this Zoom can point to a book that changed their life when they read it as a kid.
Mhm.
Every single one of us.
Well, and I'm Gen X, so we got to go to the library and read absolutely anything and everything, and nobody looked and nobody cared.
Yep.
So let's talk about your last book before you have to go. You just released your new book, By Any Other Name, and I see that there behind you, which has already hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yes.
So can you tell us about it and why you wanted to write it?
Yeah. So, By Any Other Name is about how women have been written out of history by the men who were writing it, about how women's voices have been historically silenced and are still being silenced today. It tracks two different women. In 1581, you meet Amelia Bassano, who is a real life historical figure, who is a female playwright who cannot get her work in front of the public because she's a female playwright. So she pays a man for the use of his name, and that man happens to be William Shakespeare.
Of course.
And then in 2024, it is the story of Melina Green, who is also a female playwright who has written a play about her ancestor, Amelia. But she can't get any traction on Broadway because theater is still very much a male-dominated world. So the question is whether she too is going to wind up writing herself out of history in order to see her words on a stage. So it's very much a little bit of something for everyone. It's historical fiction. It's a page turner. It is absolutely the spiciest thing I've ever written, but it's also the timeliest, because I think we are still living in a world today where women are fighting desperately for their rights, where a small group of people, as evidenced by this conversation, are making decisions about who gets to tell the stories and who gets to read them. And where, as a woman in America, you're literally standing right here at a crossroads. I keep telling everyone this. Down one lane, you're watching all your rights being stripped away, and down the other is the opportunity for the first female president. So we are literally at that flashpoint. Which way are we going to go?
That is fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. Any other last tidbits or things you want to share with us before you have to go?
I love the fact that people are interested in finding out more about book bans. I love the fact I'm looking over in the chat and I see people saying, how do we get Harris and Waltz to talk about this? There's so many things they need to talk about, but it's like they may not, which is why it's on us. Because the change is going to happen at the local level, not even the state, at the local level. So as great as it would be to hear Kamala Harris talking about book bans, and I hope she does, I think it's even more important that all of us remember we are the foot soldiers in this fight, and we are the ones that have to do something about it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here with us this evening. It has been wonderful having you here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I am going to start by bringing up some amazing women on the ground who are actually fighting back against book bans and censorship. And I just think it's important to hear these stories because, as Jodi said, we all have to be doing our part to stand up and make our voices heard. So I'm going to start by saying welcome to Amy Fogel. Some of you may actually know Amy. She worked with Red, Wine, and Blue as our deputy director in Ohio. And so she's been doing the good fight for a while here. But Amy, you recently actually had to get back in this organizing game and stand up for your local library. Can you share what happened?
Hello, everybody. It was amazing to see so many people on tonight. And I guess I joke with people, once a red, wine, and blue troublemaker, I think you're always going to be a red, wine, and blue troublemaker. So it was a very interesting experience for me. I had some folks reach out to me in the community relationships that I had through friends and the work that I've done with Red, Wine, and Blue in the past. Come up to me and say, hey, I hear that there is an individual that is showing up to our library board meetings and they want to have all of the books in the children's section that contain any sort of hint of LGBTQ plus themes or characters. They wanted all of these books labeled and put in a separate section in the library system here in my local town. And so I was basically asked, like, what can we do and how can we fight back with this? And so, it comes down to relational organizing, a little bit of grassroots organizing, texting friends. I pulled up my Canvas skills and we just came out in force to the next library board meeting and signed up to speak. And we were the first couple of meetings. There was probably 75 to 80 of us there, and just this one individual that was wanting to have these books banned or censored.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's like a fly flying around my face, so I keep waving my hands. So, what did you say? I'm sure there were people who were like, well, this isn't really a problem because the books aren't being removed. Did you hear that argument? And I'm just curious how you responded to that.
Yeah, you know what? And I was even one of those types of people when this person first reached out to me and kind of flagged that this issue was going on, I kind of was like, I don't think this is a problem. I go to this library all the time. I know the library director. I kind of felt like this was probably a nothing burger. But I said, you know what, I'll come. Let's get some people to show up to show the library support. And we'll make sure that they have the backing of the majority of their service area to show that they're not gonna stand for this. I was really shocked, and it really taught me personally a lesson, and something that I tell other people, that you just never know what's going on behind the scenes, and you can never make assumptions that someone else is going to be doing the work for you. We have 7 members on our local library board of trustees. 2 of them ended up saying some of the most shocking and appalling things about the LGBTQ plus community. Hurtful and harmful rhetoric, repeated pseudoscience that I thought that we had been leaving decades behind. And I really realized that there were some other members on the board that were kind of, I think you could say, felt uncomfortable to find themselves in this situation. And so I really do feel like us showing up and organizing and supporting a library that is free for everybody to enjoy without censorship and labels was super important. I mean, this one library board member had suggested maybe we didn't have to put a label on it. Maybe we could put a symbol like a star. And I thought I was about to fall out of my chair when this woman, who was a steward of a public good like a library, would think such things. And so, you know, these things are super important to kind of show up for your community and show them support.
I think the one thing we've learned through organizing is that this is a very small vocal minority, and when people, and they count on people not showing up. And so the fact that you had 1 person to 70, but even if it was 5 people, like just the fact that you had that many people show up and is overwhelming. And was it hard to I mean, it sounds like you had a big crowd. Was it hard to make the ask? Were people enthusiastic? Did you have to encourage people? How did you get that big of a crowd?
I mean, it was pretty simple. I didn't want to cause a ruckus. I mean, I think those of you who might be in Ohio, and like we see across a lot of states in the US, we had just, I think in that past few weeks, had a bill crop up in the Ohio legislature that was going to criminalize and charge teachers and libraries felonies for pandering obscenities. And so I really didn't want to make it a big deal. So I kept it within my network, and I just use my relational organizing. I just asked folks, hey, pass this along to your friend, your neighbor, someone who's within the area that would be interested. And that's all that it took. I even asked people to please not put the graphic out on social media, because I didn't want to turn it into some sort of hoopla. I wanted to really give the library board the opportunity. That changed after I kind of saw what was going on behind the scenes. And it really did take, I think it was like 130 days and multiple board meetings for the board to be able to vote on an amendment to their policies to make sure that this wouldn't be able to be proposed again.
Okay, Amy, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to bring up Heidi and Christine. They are together, and I want to say thank you to them because they were at the high school for their children. This is a total like mom multitasking. They were at the high school for their children, ran home to get onto the Zoom. I know you saw a little bit of Jodi. So thank you both for being here. You can unmute yourself. I fixed the I fixed the tool so you guys can unmute yourself.
Hello.
And yeah, you are zooming in from Florida, and you guys are, well, I guess it goes without saying, you're in Florida, so you're fighting book bans. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your school district and how you both got involved? We have Heidi and Christine here. You guys can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Christine Cyrier, and I'm a mom first, and but I'm also a former media specialist, though I always will hold that certification. And it all kind of started when I had left the district. I was no longer an employee there, and there was all these challenges that were happening. And our school district had a great policy that had been used in the past. and suddenly it wasn't being followed the way that I knew that it was supposed to be followed. So I kind of felt like I was, desperately out there trying to find people to talk to. And then we had the book committees. They did follow parts of their policies. And that's when I found others like Heidi. I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not. There's others that are out there.
You guys didn't know each other beforehand.
We did
No.
not. I'm Heidi, and I have never been involved in any kind of grassroots organizing before. But I heard the beginning of school 2 years ago that one parent had challenged 90 books in our school district. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, okay, I clearly, like, you can't let people come for the books, you have to do something. And so I found out the process that our schools were doing, and I participated at our school level, and then we had district committees. And when the district committees started being put together, like she was saying, I texted everybody I knew. And I said, there are signups going out asking for parents to get involved in this. Because the way our committee reviews worked, if you challenged a book and it made it to that level, it had to be 3 parents, a media specialist, an administrator, and like 2 or 3 people from the school district. And so I encouraged everybody I knew to sign up and to try to get on these committees. And we had 19 committees, which would have been just under 60 parents. And we had somewhere around 400 parents sign up to try to be on the committees. And so like they worked really hard to balance the committees and to make sure that everybody was represented on them. But I also felt like while that was happening, I reached out to everybody I knew who was participating. And I said, like, how can we work together? What ideas can we come up with? What can we do? Because you started looking at the list of books, and some of the stuff that was on there was just like the perks of being wallflower, the perks of being a wallflower was being challenged under pornography, which is just, it's a book about mental health. And there's like 3 lines on 1 page where there's a date rape that happens, but you don't even know that's happening unless you're aware that that's what it looks like. And it was pulled from our schools as pornography. And so it was really just recognizing something was happening. And even though I had no idea what I was doing, struggling until I found people who knew what they were doing. And then we worked together.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that I've left Amy up here just to join the conversation. But Amy, I think you would agree with me that that's pretty common, right? People finding each other and having no experience. This is not an uncommon thing that we have. That's
Absolutely.
yeah, that's kind of what Red, Wine, and Blue is all about, is helping people get those skills. And I know you've probably trained many people, right, Amy, over the course of this. So, so you guys were on these book challenge committees, and I remember from talking to you that almost all of the books were approved. The committee were like, these books are fine.
All of them.
So the
19 were.
next step, I don't think your school board always agreed with that, though. Is that correct?
So of the 19 books, our governor had a press conference and he waved around one of those books, which was Flamer, and talked about how terrible it was. And at our next school board meeting, our superintendent said, we are accepting all of these recommendations from our district committees except for this one. And if I'm not mistaken, the review committee that reviewed Flamer voted either unanimously or only one person on the committee voted to remove it. So it wasn't even close. And they pulled the book. They said there was no literary merit whatsoever to it. And they pulled it off our shelves. And I think that was one of the 2 things that have happened in our district that has made me the most angry, because there is no way to challenge a book challenge. If you are asking for a book to be removed at every single step of the way, if someone disagrees with your idea, you can challenge that and continue having the book looked at to be pulled. But if you don't think the book should be pulled, there is absolutely nothing you can do to argue with what our school district is doing.
Yeah, and Florida's made it especially difficult. Amy, I know that you have mentioned you talked about the importance of down ballot voting and how it actually can impact book bans. Can you explain a little more about that?
Yes. So during this experience, I really learned something that I had no clue as to how some of these library boards work. During this experience, I learned that our school board here in my hometown approves library board trustee nominations. And so who you vote for the school library in my community directly impacts who is in charge of overseeing the operations of our local library system. And then to top that off, I was then doubly shocked to find out that the very large Dayton Metro library system that surrounds my community that has something like 18 branches, their library board is appointed by the county commissioner and the Court of Common Pleas. And so I think a lot of people don't even, including myself, don't even think twice about how some of these very bottom of the ballot votes can impact a community's access to books.
Yeah, that's so important. And that's one thing we've been focusing on so much with this election is telling people, you know, everyone knows about the top of the ticket, everyone has their opinions, but the down ballot is so important. And these little races like library boards, many times people just don't vote for them. And you can make a huge impact by making sure that your friends and family vote the entire ticket and that you tell them like who are the common sense candidates to do that, because they just don't have that awareness. All right, so, and go ahead and jump back then. So Christine, you had never done this before. You had never met Heidi. So how has this experience been? What advice do you have for people who maybe are thinking about stepping up and organizing or trying to make a difference in their community around this issue or any other issue?
I would say definitely talk about it. I think that's the biggest thing. Like here, we live in the same town. It's not a giant town. Our kids go to the same school.
Our kids are the same age at the same school.
We've never talked. And so talking to others, and you know, you don't have to be loud and ugly, but just, I think it was Jodi that said whisper. It takes lots of us to whisper. So ask around, give your opinions. There are others like you out there. Go listen to your school board meetings. Ours are broadcast online, but Heidi and I, we like to try and make a presence there, at least sitting there. So putting a face with that name that is always writing or calling.
And we tried, like, when Moms for Liberty shows up at school board meetings, they wear the same color and the same shirt. And so when there are a lot of us that come to speak to something, or even just to be present in the audience to show our support for something, we'll wear like a yellow sticker. So they know that, like, they know why we are sitting there. So just showing up, even if you don't want to go sit through an 8-hour-long school board meeting, bring a friend, it's more fun. And then we reward ourselves with hash browns at Waffle House afterwards.
Absolutely amazing. And the thing I like to tell people is that, and actually that's what Red, Wine, Blue is all about, is that we know organizing is hard work, but you have to have the social and the fun aspect of it. And you make friends, right? You make friends doing this work. So a lot of people say like, oh, I don't want to make people mad. But like, honestly, I've done it. I've made more friends doing organizing and met people that I would never have met. Yeah. And definitely you need to have that after party, wine bar, pancakes, whatever it may be. Well, I want to thank you all for taking the time to come and chat with us about that. I think someone asked what school district you're in Florida. Just
Volusia County.
is Florida still pretty much a hotbed mess of book bans, or okay?
Yes.
It's not just Volusia.
It's not just Volusia. Somebody asked earlier how to find out what books are being banned places. We have an incredible resource in Florida called Florida Freedom to Read. And the two women that do it are amazing, and their information is so on point, and they monitor all 67 counties in Florida. So you can go check them out and you can see everything that's being pulled across the state of Florida and why.
And their data is data that is from public records requests. So it's not just self-reporting. So in the state of Florida, every school district does have to self-report, but they're not always accurate.
Well, thank you. I love Florida. Actually, I met both Heidi and Christine because I reached out to Florida Freedom to Read, and I was like, do you have anyone who's having any book banning issues right now? So I appreciate that organization. And in fact, they're kind of franchising. There's one in Texas now, and there's one in Wisconsin. So it's just mom volunteers who are starting these organizations and doing this. So love it. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I want to thank Amy and Heidi and Christine for coming and sharing. We really appreciate your time. Obviously, Jodi was amazing. I love her. I'm going to go read every book she ever wrote now. So everybody, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you later in the week. Like I said, we have things going on pretty much every night. So please come and hang out with us, and we will see you soon.